Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar on CUSMA, the new trade agreement between Canada, the United States, and Mexico. My name is Jorge Ravi, and I'm EDC's Chief Representative for Mexico. I'd like to start off by mentioning that this program was developed in partnership with the Trade Commissioner Service, or TCS for short. So on behalf of both EDC and the TCS, thank you for joining us today. So if you're a bit confused by the name of the new trade deal, you're not alone. Let me tell you, in Canada, we refer to it as CUSMA. In the US, it's known as USMCA, and in Mexico, it's called TMEC. Regardless of which letters come first, the new trade deal came into effect on July 1st, ending years of negotiations and uncertainty. It replaces NAFTA, which had been the trilateral agreement in place since 1994. Prior to that, Canada and the US had an FTA, or a free trade agreement, dating back to 1988. And Canada and Mexico have had a vibrant diplomatic and commercial partnership for 75 years. But it's the relationship between Canada and the US that takes center, and for some obvious reasons. We share a huge border, a common language, and similar values, making us natural trading partners. In 2019, bilateral trade in goods between Canada and the US was over $750 trillion. Let me repeat that, $750 trillion with a T. And that doesn't even include trade services or indirect investment either side of the border. While trading goods between Canada and Mexico may pale by comparison, the numbers are still substantial. Last year, bilateral trade between the two countries passed the 44 trillion mark. Of course, we all know that COVID is going to change those numbers drastically this year. The human and economic costs have been staggering. Supply chains have been negatively affected around the world. And there's growing talk about the need to reconfigure those things so that they're closer to home. It might be difficult to see past COVID right now, but we do know that we'll eventually get through this pandemic, and that trade will resume. And if the desire to nearshore some of those supply chains comes to pass, it could very well result in even greater economic activity between Canada and the US and Mexico. Which brings me to the purpose of today's webinar: to help you understand where those opportunities are and to ensure that you are ready to take advantage of them. And to do that, we have four panelists, myself included, who are experts in North American trade. So let me make the introductions. First off, we have Jean-Dominique Irachi from the Trade Commissioner Service. Jean-Dominique is the Deputy Head of Mission and Minister Counsel for Trade in Mexico. He's going to talk about the benefits of CUSMA for Canadian exporters. And most importantly, he'll outline some of the key trade compliance issues you should be aware of and point you in the direction of some important resources you can access after the broadcast. In fact, we've created a resource document for you to download from the webinar console. It includes links to all the resources and tools that our panelists will be mentioning today. So if you miss anything, no worries, we've got you covered. Next up, we'll hear from Nigel Neal, who is the Senior Trade Commissioner and Director of Trade and Investments in the US. Nigel works out of the TCS office in New York City, so he's going to address some of the COVID-related border closure issues that we're facing right now. He's also going to talk about some of the US and how to approach this huge geographic market. After Nigel, I'll talk about CUSMA, and how can this trade agreement actually help support post-COVID economic recovery. I'll provide some of my own on-the-ground observations about the Mexican market, and I'll offer some insights on how EDC Business Connection Program has created some dynamic ties between large Mexican corporates and Canadian suppliers. And finally, we'll hear from one of my colleagues, Amir Adali, who is a Senior Account Manager here at EDC. Amir is going to talk about how you can de-risk your business dealings in both US and Mexico. With all of the current economic uncertainty, you want to make sure you're pursuing all the business opportunities that are out there, but protecting yourself at the same time. After Amir's done, we'll open things up to you with our question and answer period. That's when you get to ask our experts whatever questions you have. Keep in mind, you don't have to wait until the end of the program. Just use the question box in the webinar console and fire away at any time. We'll answer as many we can during the broadcast and follow up afterwards if any of those go unanswered. So let's get started. It's great to see you, Jean-Dominique. Bonjour.
Salut, ça
Before you
va?
jump into, ça va bien, merci. Before you jump into CUSMA, why don't you start by giving us a quick overview of the Trade Commissioner Service? In particular, how do you help smaller Canadian companies do business in the US, Mexico, and around the world?
Absolutely, Jorge. Thank you for having me. The Trade Commissioner Service, we've got over 100 offices around the world, and our job is to help Canadian companies internationalize. It's a free service that's offered from embassies and consulates that we've got around the world. We offer 4 types of services. The first one is to prepare you to export. So if you don't necessarily know how to go about doing it, you've never done it, in a new country. That's a service that's offered in our offices in Canada. So it helps you prepare your strategy. The second one, you get to us and you've got a plan and you want to double check whether that plan makes sense in the new market. And you want to talk to somebody who's in the market, who knows the market, who knows your sector pretty well, and can help you fine tune your strategy. The third service is what we call a key contact search. And the way I'd like to put it is we'd like to, instead of having you make cold calls, we'd like to make them warm. We'd like to make the introductions, and which means actually pointing out to an actual person, making sure that person is interested in talking to you, taking your call, making sure that person is actually part of the group of people you need to connect as partners or eventual clients, in my case, in Mexico. And the last service is troubleshooting. So even if you've done everything right, sometimes something goes wrong. The most common element is your shipment is stuck at the border, or you have a problem getting a permit. You have a problem with your labeling. It can be all sorts of things, and our job is to do whatever we can do to make you succeed here at the end of the day. We also have a program called Can Export, which essentially we take half of the cost of you doing business in a new market. So that's to motivate people, motivate companies to explore at the export markets a bit more. And just to talk, Nigel will talk about the US, but in Mexico we've got 28 trade commissioners in 3 cities: Guadalajara, Monterrey, and Mexico City. And we serve 2,000 companies a year. So throughout that process, we acquire quite a bit of knowledge, and we've got a pretty good network that we're very happy to use and use to help new companies and new clients.
That's fantastic. It's quite impressive too. So Jean-Dominique, going into a little bit of why we're here today, why are free trade agreements so important, and what are the specific benefits to Canadian companies?
Well, generally speaking, free trade agreements are important because it removes barriers to trade. They can be tariff barriers, an extra tax that nobody wants to pay taxes, or non-tariff barriers. Some obscure rules. Sure, you can do business in France, but you need to have your piece of paper stamped in that particular office that you can never reach unless you take a 12-hour drive from Paris. So free trade agreements, the aim is to create certainty, to create predictability, to open the market, and essentially it's to give you a bit of a recipe book. These are the processes that you need to follow in order to export to Mexico, and CUSMA offers that, obviously.
Okay. So actually, my next question has to do with CUSMA. So with the new CUSMA deal, there have been a lot of changes from the old NAFTA agreement. Is that something that you would agree? I guess what are the changes that you're seeing, and also what are the specific benefits that the average business should be aware of?
Yeah, I will point at one, because frankly, the new NAFTA or CUSMA is very similar to the previous deal that we had as far as SMEs are concerned. So while we managed to protect our interests, we managed to modernize the agreement in large part. I think the most important point is we realized that more than half of our clients leave on the table the tariffs. They would rather, in the past, not use NAFTA, not go through filling forms, and export to Mexico and the US and pay the extra tariff, 3, 4, sometimes 10%. And so realizing this, the main effort, I think the main change that interests the audience today is that we've simplified the rules of origin process. So, rules of origin is essentially to make sure that what you're actually exporting to the U.S. and Mexico is actually Canadian made. It's not made in a third country and you're a backdoor to getting tariff-free access to North America. And so in the past, it was a bit cumbersome. Now the main change, it's a self-declaration, I guess a trust but verify type of process that the Canadian Border Security Safety Agency is managing. And I think that's the main point I want to highlight today.
Okay, great. Jean-Dominique, can you talk about any specific requirements or hurdles that our audience should be aware of when selling to the US or Mexico under the new agreement? And essentially, I think would be important to try to understand what do they need to know and how can they be better prepared for what's coming ahead?
Yeah, generally speaking, and Nigel will speak more specifically about the US, but generally speaking, the type of problems that fall under troubleshootings are problems where we would have liked you to speak to us first. So to protect your intellectual property, to make sure you're dealing with the right people. I'll take the example of Mexico. I tend to say Mexico is the good, the bad, and the ugly. The ugly part are states where I don't want you to set foot. These are dangerous places. These are places where operating is extremely difficult. There's high level of corruption, and the government won't be able to help you much. They're areas of Mexico that are tough to deal with. I mean, the Mexican government right now is going through austerity measures, and we know that the oil company, for example, is extremely late, if ever, in paying its suppliers. So, what you need to know about Mexico, it's a large country, and the good side of Mexico is that it tends to be located north in the center to do business. For us, it's very easy. The companies you deal with are companies that are often foreign. If you're dealing with General Motors and based out of Querétaro, you're dealing in the same fashion you'd be dealing with General Motors out of the U.S. or out of Canada. So, and the other thing I think it's important to highlight that a couple of points culturally. The first one I like to say is Mexicans don't answer emails. If you want a Mexican to answer an email, you better phone them first and ask them to check their email. It's about WhatsApp, and you need to get to know them more personally. An exchange on WhatsApp on your cellular, and now it's a bit tough for COVID, but you need to travel on several occasions and get to know the individual on a personal basis to establish that relationship of trust. Now, a corollary to this is that some of you might have already been approached by Mexicans who say, I'd be a great agent for you or a great partner for you because I know all these people. The network is extremely important in Mexico, and most Mexicans will introduce themselves kind of listing everyone they know. And so, our advice is, hey, those might be great people, but give us a chance to give you more choices. Don't necessarily settle for a exclusive relationship with one individual that you might have met at a trade show.
That's great advice. Thank you very much. We actually, it's a nice segue into my next question, which is, we promise our viewers that we will provide them with specific resources so that they can go after the program. Can you share some of those resources with us? And also, what is the best way for any company to get in touch with the TCS?
Yeah, I would say the resources are on the site. The one I want to highlight is tradecommissioner.gc.ca. I think that's the easiest place to start. On there, you can see the material that we've got about Mexico, about different markets, about how to do business in several in general terms. It also shows who you should contact. Right, you put in the market, the sector you're in, and it tells you who you should contact. And I think that's probably the best way to start. Okay,
great, short and sweet. That's how the audience likes it. So, Jean-Dominique, one last question for you, and I think this is quite important for the audience to realize that all of the things that we say are actually coming to fruition with specific examples. So, I'd like you to give us a really quick example of a Canadian company that your team was able to help to take off in Mexico.
Yeah, so the example I want to highlight is a company called Off to Class. It's a company that supplies English as a second language software. And so they already had an international strategy, and they approached us. They approached my team to help them internationalize, to help them find new clients in Mexico. So we went back and forth with them and decided jointly on what would seem to be the best approach to try first. And then we provided contact points at various institutions. And by contact point, I mean somebody we actually spoke to that was actually interested in the software, and for whom we actually made the connection. So Off to Class was able to phone them, and already, we're the government of Canada, and that might resonate a bit oddly within our country. But when you're abroad, it comes with we're lucky to have that brand. So it does open door, and so we use it. Might as well take advantage of it. So obviously there were costs associated with them traveling to the country and exploring the market. Obviously there's some exchange that need to happen in Spanish, translation, etc. So they asked for a CanExport budget, which they got, which helped them finance their international business development plan. In that particular case, I'll highlight also something that the new CUSMA helps with, is that in the past, in 1993, we weren't really talking a lot about the World Wide Web. Actually, I started on that year in my job, and if I remember well, it did not exist. And so what we did in this current iteration of our free trade deal is add a chapter. Digitization. And so I won't get into the details, but for example, it specifies what should be taxed and not taxed when you're operating in country, and that was a gray area that was causing us a lot of issues. And the last thing I want to highlight with Off to Class is that we actually found them a spot in an incubator at Ryerson University, because we run all sorts of other programs. One is called the Canadian Technology Accelerator. So a company that we've identified as having high growth potential are companies with whom we spend more time and support in developing their product further.
Okay, well, that's quite impressive. Well done. Kudos to your team for that great example. Thank you very much. So we're just going to move on to the next segment with Nigel and talk a little bit about the US, and I'm sure the audience will have some questions for you at the end, Jean-Dominique. Merci. So now let's look at the U.S. market with Nigel. And to do that, we have a very experienced trade commissioner, Nigel Neal, from the TCS. Welcome, Nigel.
Thank you, Jorge. It's great to be here.
Thank you. So Nigel, you're the Senior Trade Commissioner and Director of Trade and Investment for the TCS out of New York City. So I'd like to know, what is the total territory that you cover, and I'd like to also ask if you can give us a quick overview of what's happening in the U.S. right now, especially in your area, and how do you think that's affecting Canadian businesses?
For sure. Thanks, Jorge. Let me start by saying, I really appreciate this opportunity to partner with EDC. I mean, these are flagship partnerships that we have. And also the opportunity to engage directly with our Canadian business clients. That's our priority. So this is a great opportunity. In terms of the territory that myself and my team cover, we help Canadian clients expand in New York, in New Jersey, in Pennsylvania, Connecticut, and Delaware. So we also have a pillar which is to promote job-creating foreign direct investment from American corporates from this territory into Canada. To accomplish this, I have an incredible team of 16 working hard, spread across New York City, with offices in Buffalo, Philadelphia, and Pittsburgh. I do want to mention quickly that our team here in New York, we are part of a broader network of 16 offices across the US, all of us working seamlessly together, and also with partners such as EDC and our domestic presence in Canada.
Okay, well, great for that overview. So, Nigel, Canada and the U.S. have an extremely well-established trade relationship, and no one will dispute that. And we know that that's obviously that for a fact. Can you talk about some of the sectors that you are seeing where Canadian companies do particularly well in the US?
Absolutely, Jorge. I just realized I didn't answer the second part of your question, which I think is very relevant. So let me jump back to that if I may.
Sure. Go ahead.
In terms of what's happening in the US, clearly there's a lot on the horizon. We have an election coming up. We have the border closure. We've had Black Lives Matter and the racial injustice in the country. And of course, the economic, the social, and the health challenges as a result of COVID. I want to drill down quickly on the border closure because I feel that's very important for our Canadian business audience. I want to clarify, first of all, that the border is closed to non-essential, discretionary, and recreational activity and travel until September 21st. But then, of course, we have the Quarantine Act in Canada that is in effect until September 30th. While this, of course, has had a significant impact on our economy and our hardworking SMEs, I do want to reiterate that essential business does continue. And by essential, I'm referring to supply chains, to manufacturing, construction, critical infrastructure, anything that supports the COVID relief efforts, from medical supplies and movement of medical personnel. So these are approaching pre-COVID levels. It's important to flag. For our audience, clearly there are questions: what constitutes essential or not? I would advise you, please go to the experts, that's CBSA, Canada Border Services Agency. Lots of information on the web, and they do have a very helpful hotline, and they are very responsive. I want to pick up quickly, Jean-Dominique mentioned, our problem-solving, troubleshooting function, which is extremely important. Anytime if there's a Canadian business client that has had issues at the border around the border closure and customs clearance, we can assist you by navigating through the U.S. Customs and Border Protection Agency, through their import specialists. As I mentioned, I have an office and a team in Buffalo, and they provide this critical service for our clients.
Okay.
But I'll close by saying, really encouraged by the level of activity and interest from the business community to these virtual solutions. I mean, it's what we've got, and nothing will replace face-to-face in person, but face-to-face on a Zoom is working well. So we have doubled or even tripled down our efforts to reach our clients to help at this critical juncture. Okay, so with that, I can go to the second question.
So let me just since because those points that you just raised are extremely important, and I'm sure that a lot of our viewers were wondering about those. So that's great that you actually mentioned those. So let me try to bundle two things together. So as I asked you before about the sectors where in your experience Canadian companies do particularly well. But I also would like to actually throw a couple of other things there because, obviously COVID, which you already referred to, I'm sure that there's a lot of opportunities that are coming up as a result of COVID. So, sectors where our Canadian companies do well, and also, what are the opportunities that you are seeing as a result of the COVID crisis for Canadian businesses?
Sure thing. Thanks, Jorge. Let me start by saying, we consider the U.S. to be the market of markets. It is and always will be our most important trading partner across the board. And the fact that we have had a form of a free trade agreement since 1988 has created the stability and the certainty and the predictability that Jean-Do mentioned before, and that's allowed our trade to grow and flourish. A statistic that always amazed me is there are more goods exports coming to my 5-state territory than to the entire EU. Pause. Of course, we have the CETA that's come into effect a couple of years ago, so we'll hope to see increases in that trade. We in Canada buy more goods and services from the US than the UK, Japan, and Germany combined. That's another really important statistic that proves the value of free trade. Canadian companies operating in the US employ over 825,000, and one example is Thomson Reuters in their New York office have over 16,000 New York City employees. So these are really impressive. In terms of the sectors, what I would say is given the history and given the importance of the market, all sectors are priorities, and there are opportunities across the gamut. So these range from the traditional to the cutting edge. So commodities, oil and gas. The US imports 40% of its crude from Canada. Metals, paper products, plastics, pharmaceuticals, chemicals, agriculture, agri-food, moving into infrastructure, advanced manufacturing, and automotive. And we always like to say, and this is Canada, US, and Mexico, we make things together to export to the world. On the tech side, ICT has flourished into myriad verticals of importance, clean tech, climate tech, property tech, resource tech, ag tech, fintech, insure tech, reg tech, audit tech. It goes on and on. And I do need to mention also flourishing cultural industries and creative industries pillar, which is part of our sectors of offering.
Okay, so Nigel, the US being such a huge market, and many of our audiences and many of the companies that both TCS and EDC are trying to help and support in our day-to-day operations are small businesses. Where do you think, and where do you recommend those small businesses start? How do they dip their toe in this market? If we could allow ourselves that expression, how do they get to really understand what's happening there and get started?
Yeah, no, that's a key question. Perhaps I'll open that by a quick review in terms of what is up and coming in terms of what the situation around COVID and work from home has presented to us. This is where I get really excited, and my team as well. COVID-19 really has been a catalyst in terms of accelerating the digitalization of so many verticals, some existing and some new. Telehealth, digital networking and events, robotics, supply chain innovations, drones, autonomous technologies, distance learning, e-commerce, remote work, digital payments, etc. So, an example of that is, we're seeing new SaaS nudge technologies which have been created for individuals to do their own COVID self-certification and screening, and this can be rolled out to a wide audience. So if we're looking at some of these new technologies, there's a lot that New York can offer. So to pick up on your question, specifically, how does a small business start? First and foremost, not surprisingly, the US is a hyper-competitive market. So, we have a privileged position, but as Canada, but we can't take that for granted. Every other country in the world is also here trying to do business. So companies need to sharpen your knowledge and approach and develop a competitive advantage. So this speaks to preparation. Understanding the risks, and I understand Amira is going to speak to that next. Really defining your interests and being specific. What do you have, what do you want to do, and where do you want to do it? I'll give you an example. So if you're in anything around green technologies, clean tech, climate tech, look at the states where this is a priority. So New York, Massachusetts, California, Colorado. And that is where we have one of our clean technology accelerator programs that kicks off next week in clean tech. And incidentally, we have another one in cybersecurity and in digital health coming up. If you're in the life sciences field, there's the corridor that runs from Boston to DC and everything in between in Philadelphia. So we're doing good work there. We have a cellular and gene therapy boot camp that's starting up later in the fall. Our regional offices we've mentioned are absolutely critical in this effort. I would also say, New York City is a wealth of opportunity, but oftentimes for SMEs dipping the toe into the water, you may want to consider an area, a city that's not New York, that is perhaps less competitive and where one can take a bit more time, find one's bearings, establish one's credibility and reputation. And as I mentioned, I've got officers who are in Buffalo, in Pittsburgh, in Philadelphia, so we can help you look at a market entry strategy there. One example also, we run an International Trade Day that targets the border region, Buffalo, but bringing Canadian clients from the Niagara region to meet with Customs and Border Protection to understand what the importing requirements are on the US side. So critical for capacity building for our SMEs. Last thing I'll say is you need to understand the landscape. So federal, state, municipal legislation and regulation, requirements around tax, around labor, around shipments, etc. You got to brief yourself. And of course, there's a lot to learn, especially for a new exporter. So we can put you in touch with the experts that can help you with that very detailed advice. Customs brokers, freight forwarders, immigration, tax lawyers, running the gamut.
Okay, well, that's a lot of information. I think that our audience is extremely appreciative of everything that you've highlighted. I'm just going to finish with one last although you already mentioned a number of resources. If I were to ask you for the two main resources that you would recommend to better understand the opportunities in the U.S., you already alluded to some of those, but what would you recommend our audience as your final word for this part of the webinar?
Sure. Yeah. So there's so much out there. Jean-Dominique referred to our website. Absolutely. But what we're doing within my team, we're really trying to drive client engagement through our new LinkedIn page. It's TCS in NY, and that links to the website. So I'd be happy to share that with the resources, and I hope to see everyone who's on this call join and grow our following there. I think what's important also is to think broadly beyond government. There are so many other players in the ecosystem. For example, chambers of commerce and other industry associations. For example, we're working with a great new organization, the Maple Business Council, which just launched a New York chapter, complementing its presence on the West Coast. We have provincial partners who are with us in territory, governments of Quebec and Ontario. But I would say also just understanding, what's going on within your community of practice. So if you're in a tech field, Communitech, Velocity, DMZ, Mars, these are people who have a real understanding of what opportunities are in the US, and we work very closely with them. And then lastly, I'll say, locally, and I'll just speak to New York, you've got Barclays Rise, which is the FinTech accelerator. You've got the New York Tech Alliance. You've got the Pittsburgh Tech Council. There is no shortage of industry groups that can help you, and we know as many of them as we can, which is most of them. So happy to make those sorts of connections. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing those, Nigel. And I'm be prepared, because I'm sure that there's going to be a lot of work for your team after this webinar with so many good ideas that you've shared with us. So thank you very much. Appreciate it. So now it's my turn to talk about how CUSMA can help Canadian companies, especially as we look forward to the post-COVID economic recovery. And because I work from the Canadian Embassy in Mexico City, it might make sense for me to share with you some of the observations from being here on the ground in Mexico since 2018. As EDC's chief rep for the Mexican market, my role is to build and foster relationships between Canadian businesses and Mexican private and public sector partners through our suite of financial, insurance, and knowledge solutions in support of this very, very important trade relationship with Canada. This year, EDC is celebrating 20 years of doing business in Mexico. Mexico was our very first international representation. Now we have 20, including the last one that we opened in Sydney a couple of years ago. And Mexico essentially is a key market for us. Our team is here always to support the success of our Canadian companies, and that's something that many of you have actually benefited from in the past. In 2019, the total merchandise trade between our three countries amounted to nearly 1.3 trillion US dollars, and that's triple the continental trade level since 1994. And one piece of data that I really like to highlight, and that our EDC economics team was able to provide us with, is the fact that last year, 2019, the NAFTA partners represented 18.3% of the world's GDP in a region that only comprises about 6.3% of the global population, and those numbers are quite impressive. So we see CUSMA and this trilateral partnership as a way of enabling Canadian companies to use regional supply chains, as we had mentioned before, that can offer more comprehensive and competitive products and services to our international customers. So naturally, Mexico and the US are priority markets for Canada and also for EDC. EDC's position as a leader in international finance and as a conduit to meaningful business connections for Canadian suppliers allow us to significantly contribute to the success of the Mexican economy, which is actually something that we're very proud of, not only Mexico, but also in parts of the world where EDC is present and is actively supporting Canadian business and investors and exporters alike. So one thing, and Jean-Dominique alluded to that before when he used that analogy of the good, the bad, and the ugly, that Sergio Leone analogy that he used, of course, is that while Mexico offers tremendous opportunity, it's important that Canadian exporters and investors navigate the business environment with eyes wide open. And security and corruption, unfortunately, continue to be two of the greatest business challenges in this market. And we have seen noticeable improvements in the fight against corruption in Mexico and after the inception of NAFTA in 1994, and we expect this to continue under CUSMA. Nevertheless, and we won't repeat it enough times, it's important to remain vigilant when brokering deals anywhere in the world, and because there's no immune jurisdiction to this type of business threat. And considering these challenges remains obviously a world of opportunity to grow your business in CUSMA once as it came into effect a couple of months ago. So just a quick observations as I mentioned, my being there for the past couple of years. Let me just jump very quickly to how EDC sees the opportunities as a result of in a post-COVID world. There's no secret, and obviously we are not telling you anything that you haven't felt. Of course, that COVID pulled back the curtain on some of the vulnerabilities in global supply chains, and that's unfortunately a very dire effect. And nations shut down their borders to deal with their own domestic problems, and that obviously has caused some ripple effects around the world. And of course, those repercussions were mostly seriously felt by the closures in China. So many countries have come to the realization that they have become over-dependent on Asia in many cases, and they're looking at ways to fix that vulnerability. One of the ways they're doing that is by rethinking supply chains, and they're looking to bring back some production domestically or build some regional supply chains. And that's another reason why EDC is a strong believer in the Canada-US-Mexico relationship, because CUSMA is based on economic freedom, regional cooperation, and democratic principles, which we believe could play an important role under the post-COVID economic recovery for North America. We think that the new agreement will help boost export and investment opportunities for the countries in North America. And I believe that it will provide a much needed sense of stability and certainty in our region. As my colleagues from the TCS have said, the COVID-19 crisis has indeed reinforced the necessity for accelerated digitization and automation. And according to EDC Economics, this shift is expected to create growth in artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, cybersecurity, telecommunications, life sciences, etc. And that's something that Nigel mentioned quite eloquently before. So that's great news for CUSMA countries because supply chains would likely become more regionally concentrated. And under the COVID situation, North American countries will look at other regional options for procurement in order to reduce disruption on their supply chain. Therefore, North American trade demand will be expected to increase. Under CUSMA, it is expected to increase also the foreign direct investment. And North America is looking now to be a regional hub. Nigel talked also about some opportunities for Canadian exporters in the US. So let me touch on some of the opportunities in Mexico. When you think about trade between Canada and Mexico, most people think about the oil and gas sector or the auto sector or mining. And let me tell you that what we have seen is that there's a myriad of other sectors that sometimes Canadian companies are not necessarily looking at, and our job. And Jean-Dominique's team has also collaborating with EDC on this regard is to increase the visibility of some of the opportunities in Mexico. So in 2019, EDC was responsible for more than $3 billion in business volume in Mexico. That's Canadian dollars we're speaking, of which 1.6 billion went to financing companies in different economic sectors. As I said previously, new business opportunities are strongly linked to the implementation of innovative solutions across different sectors. And we believe and are seeing that leveraging advanced technologies in the development and modernization of supply chains is going to be critical in North America going forward. Retail, for example, is a sector that offers opportunities for brands across all categories and segments. And in addition, the changing lifestyles of different populations, including Mexico, of course, have created a trend and increased demand for high quality and healthy products, ready-to-eat foods, specialty and gourmet. And this is not limited to the presence of products in store shelves, but also via e-commerce. And Dominic alluded to that as well as being one of the important changes that we are seeing under CUSMA. So digital trade and e-commerce chapter within CUSMA will support businesses in the shift towards a more digital economy. And that also will happen while strengthening consumer data protection. And that we believe and are convinced that is going to provide more opportunities for Canadian technology companies to address some of the needs in the North American markets. Finally, and I mentioned, I alluded to foreign direct investment before. In 2019, the Canadian direct investment in Mexico exceeded $22 billion. And in recent years, our EDC's Canada or Canadian direct investment abroad or CDIA strategy has evolved into a very powerful tool for increasing and diversifying Canadian trade. And those common examples of the strategy, and Amira will speak to that in a moment, include providing loans to help Canadian companies open facilities in new markets, to participate or to even form joint ventures. And these numbers suggest to EDC that there's a significant opportunity for Canadian companies to succeed in the Mexican market. Let me quickly just mention that one of the difficulties that we see in doing business in the new market is making the right connection. So I'd like to take a couple of minutes to tell you about EDC's connection program, because it's made some significant inroads in Mexico. And under this program, some of the largest Mexican corporations with the best reputation and the best corporate practices in a wide array of sectors, automotive, ICT, retail and consumer goods, forestry, energy, just to name a few, are provided with financing at commercial terms, encouraging them to consider qualified Canadian suppliers for their procurement needs. Latin America continues to be EDC's strongest market for this program. And last year in Mexico, we facilitated 354 introductions to Mexican customers with 182 Canadian suppliers. And that's quite impressive and something that we're very proud of. And these introductions are conducted during business connection events that we can do in Mexico or in Canada. And our business connection are helping Canadian companies break into new markets and reduce their business development costs, which is one of the reasons why both the Trade Commissioner Service and EDC try to work together and partner as much as we do. Let me just finish with two recent success stories on how this program is helping Canadian companies grow, and succeed in Mexico. The first one belongs to the retail sector. In 2017, the TCS and EDC introduced Canadian manufacturing of healthy pulse-based snacks, Three Farmers Foods from Saskatchewan, to Organización Soriana, the biggest Mexican retailer in Mexico with more than 800 stores and presence in the 32 states of Mexico. Because of the high quality products and competitive pricing of Three Farmers, within a year, their products were on Soriana's store shelves. And it's one of the success stories that we are seeing. And the second one is one that I have been following for quite some time, which is with Alberta-based company Siemens Edeco and NUPEC, an oil and gas subsidiary of one of our clients under the Connection Financing Program, or the Business Connection, the Mexican leading industrial conglomerate Alpha. That introduction took place in Mexico during a trade show in the fall of 2018. And thanks to its competitive proposal and a commitment to understanding the Mexican market, Siemens Edeco has already been awarded drilling contracts in Mexico with NUPEC, and the relationship keeps growing. So through our deep knowledge of these Canadian companies and sectors, we are not only a trusted financial partners, but also a source of products and services from Canada. And our message is clear, and I'll conclude here. Canada and EDC can help you grow into international markets. So that's it for my part. I'm just gonna turn it over to my colleague, Amira, who is going to join us. And Amira is, as I mentioned before, a senior account manager with our commercial market group. Amita, I hope you're keeping safe and sound. Thank you for your patience and welcome to the webinar.
Thank you, Jorge. I honestly wish I was sitting in your spot in Mexico, to be honest.
Thanks a lot. So, Amita, the US is such a logical first market for Canadian companies to venture into, and the majority of our exporters, as we know, start there. Are there any specific risks of doing business in the US? What are you hearing from the customers you're talking to?
Definitely, Jorge. I mean, in business, there's always going to be risks, even if you're just going to our neighboring country in the US. The only difference is the risks can differ depending on the business sector that you're in. In dealing with my customers, the things I hear often in terms of common themes, I can really take down to 4 main buckets. The number one bucket is the foreign exchange risk. So due to the volatile nature of the currency market, a lot of the times that can have an effect on the company's bottom line margin. So that's risk number one. Number two is the political risk. So the regulation changes in different countries, even in the US, tariff barriers or trade regulations that change unexpectedly is a second risk. The risk of non-payment. So when you're dealing with countries that, even if it's in the US and buyers that you haven't dealt with before, there's always the risk of not knowing the credit worthiness of these buyers. And also situations that a lot of our companies have faced when your goods get shipped, they can't cross the border and your customer cannot pay you. Finally, the fourth risk that we face a lot of the times with Canadian companies is the risk of obtaining working capital support. Now, when you're going internationally, even into the US or Mexico or any other international market, there's more complexities and it's more cumbersome to obtain the working capital support you need to expand your international footprint or to acquire, let's say, foreign acquisitions. So those are the top 4 key elements I feel that are the risks that a lot of our companies face all the time.
All right, thank you. So, Amita, if I were to ask you now that you've outlined the risk, what types of strategies are available to help businesses guard against those risks?
So the business ecosystem is quite large, Jorge, as you know. And what's important is for a Canadian company to know, to understand, and to apply the strategies and solutions that are available. EDC, amongst many of the partners, PCS included, have a lot of strategies and solutions that work together simultaneously to support these strategies. To go back to the 4 risks that I mentioned, for foreign exchange risk, it's important for Canadian companies to talk to their bank, to talk to a broker, and to put in place a foreign exchange strategy so that when there's a volatile currency fluctuations in the market, that they have a strategy in place where they're buying forward contracts and making sure that strategy protects them. Now, when they are going for these types of strategies, a lot of the time they need to put up collateral to their brokers for, let's say, the settlement amount. EDC has a solution for that in which we can provide a foreign exchange guarantee on that collateral amount and therefore releasing that collateral to them. From a political risk standpoint, it's important to look at countries who had trade agreements, and CUSMA is the perfect example of that, doing business in countries like the US and Mexico where there are these trade agreements. From the risk management, the risk mitigating aspect, the strategy for that is to make sure that one of the biggest assets on your books, which your accounts receivable, is well protected. So putting in place an accounts receivable insurance policy that protects that AR and also can protect the costs incurred in case one of your contracts gets canceled. And a lot of the times these policies are very tailored towards your business. So they can be, you can pick and choose what you're looking to cover. And finally, looking at the working capital aspect. And when you are looking at foreign acquisition or growing internationally, like I said before, it is a little bit more cumbersome to obtain that working capital support. And EDC's export guarantee program can assist by providing a guarantee to your bank that allows the bank and the EDC to get that comfort in giving you the working capital to expand internationally. Alternatively as well, when you are dealing internationally, a lot of the contracts can have requirements of standby letters of credit. And these standby LCs, most of the time, will require collateral upfront to your bank. And EDC can backstop that as well to your bank, releasing that working capital back to you. So different strategies and ways, different solutions. It's just a matter of companies being able to seek out and see what's available to them.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'm just going to go over the, I only have 2 questions for you because I like to give people time for Q&A. We're already receiving a lot of questions from our audience. So, Amira, where can you give us some specific examples of customers doing business in both the US and Mexico? And, what were their issues I think would be important to know? And how did these strategies that you just mentioned help them do business in these markets?
For sure. So a lot of my portfolio, they either deal in Mexico or deal in the US, or sometimes both together. And one example that really comes to mind is a company I worked with in the last few months that approached EDC because they were looking at an acquisition in the US where the company had a very good synergy with their current domestic business. Now, the problem they came to us is providing the bank more comfort and giving them that working capital to complete that acquisition transaction. What we did is we provided them with a guarantee on that facility that helped them complete the transaction of the acquisition. So that's how we helped them with that aspect. Now, when the acquisition was completed, the company was faced with a little dilemma. Do they bring production to Canada? Do they maintain it in the US, which may have a little bit of higher cost, or do they look at other avenues? And Jorge, this is where you were great as our chief rep in Mexico. We had provided them with an introduction to yourself, and you provided an introduction to our trade commissioner partners in Mexico. The client got on a conference call with our TCS partners in Mexico, and what they learned was about the maquiladoras in Mexico. So the company decided to actually move production into the US, which that was the best strategy for them. Finally, after we went through the first step of the acquisition, we made the introduction to the TCS. They were getting a lot of inflow of business from both US and Mexico. So now they were dealing with new buyers that they didn't really know the credit worthiness of because they haven't done business with them before. This is where we put in place a tailored insurance policy for their accounts receivable. So this way, EDC was vetting all the new buyers they were dealing with and making sure that they were protected against the risk of non-payment. So overall, we were walking through them with them from the acquisition to the introductions all the way down to the risk mitigation.
Okay, that's fantastic. I like that you actually mentioned maquiladoras because we just received a question from our audience. So I'm just going to wait to bring that question with the one that I previously had. So that was great, Amira. Thank you very much for sharing with us. So that brings us to the last segment of today's broadcast, our Q&A period. So as I mentioned, we've already received lots of input. So thank you to everyone who sent your questions so far. So please bear with me. I'm just going to take a minute to scroll through some of the questions you've sent us. So as I mentioned, we still have time, so please keep them coming. So Amira, as I mentioned before, there's actually one question here about something you alluded to before, the concept of maquiladora in Mexico. So our audience is wondering if you can explain how that avenue can assist our businesses, Canadian businesses, doing business differently in Mexico, and what are some of the benefits of that system?
For sure. So the maquiladora is really a manufacturing operation or factories in Mexico. So they're usually near the US-Mexican border, and they operate under favorable duty-free environment. Now, the presence of the maquiladora is really an agreement that was established between the US and Mexico back in the 1960s. And the benefit of these factories are certain tax advantage, and they make them very attractive for foreign businesses to come in and make production there. So companies can capitalize on the competitive labor force, and they can also benefit from doing business closer to the US and as well have the tax benefit. In the case of our customer, that was an appealing solution. They had the production closer to the US, they minimized the cost, and they benefit from the tax advantages. So all in all, it was a win-win solution.
Okay, great. So we have other questions that I believe are better suited for the TCS, for Jean-Dominique and Nigel. So I'm just gonna ask you the first one, which is actually quite important. What is the difference between duty and tariff? Hope it's not a tricky one.
I, I thought they were pretty much one and the same. And I think as far as businesses are concerned, it comes out the same. But I like that suddenly. I think that's stretching my English language skills. So Nigel, do you have a better answer? I do.
No, I'm with you on that one. It's essentially the same thing.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much. This one is quite important. I think it's I'm sure you'll be able to enlighten us here. So, when do we need a CUSMA certificate when exporting from Canada to US or Mexico? And at what value do we need the certificate? I'll leave one of you, just Nigel or Jean-Dominique.
Well, I think if you let me start, you better double check because the question is very dependent on the sector and the type of product that you're dealing with. So pretty much in every sector, when you're exporting to the US, there's an expectation, or to Mexico, there's an expectation that your product is Canadian or that there was significant value added in Canada, which means that the certificate, I'm not sure which one you're referring to, but if we're talking about rules of origin, for example, certificate, or the paper, the declaration now that we're doing, it's pretty much necessary in most cases. And with regards to where does it start, there's something called a de minimis in free trade agreements that give trade policy experts skin rashes. It's pretty low. It's not the same in Mexico as it is in the US, and I can't remember exactly the dollar figure, but it's I believe around $100. So it starts pretty early.
Okay, all right.
May I jump in just on that?
Sure, Nigel, go ahead.
Just a compliment on the certification part. There have been some changes to the process whereby there used to be a physical set form that has now been replaced by the need to respond to a number of determined questions. But the method of how you do that, there is more flexibility. So that's one innovation, I would say. And then on de minimis, yeah, the US has a threshold of $800. Canada's has gone up from 40 to I think it's 150. So we're getting there. It's an improvement from what it was.
All right. Okay. Thank you very much. Jean-Dominique, here's a question for you. You were talking about getting to know the culture of Mexicans to be able to build on the ground relationships. How do you recommend doing that in this current environment? And I think that's a great question. So if you would try to be as brief as possible so that we can have time for another question, please.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, it's extremely difficult to do that. I mean, we use a lot of Zooms and Teams. It's not a great time to enter a new market or create new relationships. But it does work. We found that webinars, the Zoom interactions have there's been quite a bit of appetite. I mean, in Mexico, we're still pretty much isolated. COVID is still at high levels. So people are like I am, right? In a room, happy to at least see faces. But it's an extra effort, and creating relationships by no means is an easy thing to do virtually.
Okay, all right. So we have time for one more question, and this one is for Amira. So many of I'm just going to read it as it is was presented to us. Many of my goods were stuck at the border, and our clients became overdue. Would EDC still provide coverage?
So that's the thing, Jorge, with companies, they need to come to us before the house starts burning down. So before your clients become overdue, come to us and get an insurance policy. So, or even look at other options in the market, but make sure you have a policy in place, because a lot of the times when a client's already overdue, it's a lot harder to get insured for them. So EDC did adapt a lot because of the COVID situation in terms of kind of going above the guidelines generally to be able to protect our clients and work with them as we move through this scenario. But it's just important for us to make sure that they have the insurance policy before anything could potentially happen. So definitely there is ways to work around it with them depending on the scenario. It's just important to make sure that they have the policy ahead of time, not when the house is burning down.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for that. So I want to thank the three of you for your time with us. That's unfortunately all the time that we have for today. So thank you, Jean-Dominique. Merci beaucoup, Nigel, Amira, for sharing your expertise with us. And thank to you, our audience, for letting us into your busy workday. I hope this webinar has provided you with lots of insights into CUSMA as the new trade agreement and how to prepare your business to take advantage of all the opportunity that it provides and for the better days ahead. We'll be sending you a survey over the next few days, requesting your feedback on this webinar. If you have the time to respond, we'd really appreciate it. It lets us bring some continuous improvement to the way we do things. And please let us know about the specific business challenges that you're facing right now due to the pandemic. If you have any questions in the meantime, please give us a call at 1-800-229-0575. That's 1-800-229-0575 to speak with one of our trade advisors. Until next time, thank you.